All right, go ahead.
All right, thanks, Corey. So today we are going to be doing a couple of things simultaneously. The first thing, obviously, is that we're going to be reviewing the proposed updates to the guiding principles and the criteria changes that we heard from the public meeting earlier. But the second thing we're going to be doing, and this is in some ways just as important because of the short timeline, we've also got to preview the format that we're exploring to use to get feedback at the public meeting on the 30th. So fortunately, I guess, we're operating remotely. And so we're going to use a program called Mentimeter today, which is the same one that we're proposing to use for the public meeting. And what's really neat about it is that it's great for situations like this, where we want to get feedback from everybody, or like on the 30th, we want to get feedback from the 100+ people we expect to have there. But it's tough to do that in a conversational format. So this lets us get feedback on specific things and to see that in real time from everybody. So it's a little bit like a conversation, except pretty controlled, as it kind of needs to be. So a couple of notes on how to use this. You see a link up there at the top. If you're on your phone, I'm going to describe that to you. If you're on your computer, I suggest actually using your phone, although you can also use a browser on your desktop, and go to menti.com. And there will be an opportunity to enter a code there, which I'll tell you in a few seconds. If you're viewing the presentation right now, you also see a QR code, and you can just scan that with your phone and it'll take you right there. So again, I think we've got a few folks who are maybe not viewing the presentation and hearing it on your phone. So that is menti.com. You can type that into any web browser, and then you're going to enter this code. It's 47605429. Again, that code is 47605429. And I see some folks are logging in and thumbing up the page. Thank you for doing that. I'll describe how to get in a couple more times in case we've got folks who join later. Let's see. So Menti is going to show you the presentation, and you're going to have the opportunity to give your feedback at the same time. So we're going to do that. That's the bulk of what we're going to do today. And then Rachel is going to talk us through a little bit public meeting number 2, the format that we're going to use, and some of the notes about that. And then we've also got some preliminary results from the online survey. Obviously, that's just a snapshot in time. It's open until the 26th. And we'll do a full summary after that, but this will give you an idea about where things are headed. We've got quite a few responses already, I'm very happy to say. Quick test question first, just to make sure everything is working. So will we get snow this year? All right, I think y'all are figuring it out. You can tell the native San Antonians. The other thing I'm going to do is kind of hold on. Please do answer this question, even if it's silly, which obviously it is, because that lets us gauge the number of people who are connected, and we'll look for that total number later on as we go through the presentation. So we're up to 22 now. Again, please do go ahead and respond if you'll be responding to the survey questions. We'll hang on here for a couple minutes to let folks jump on. And if you're having any problems, please feel free to unmute and say what's up, and we'll see if we can't get things figured out. All right, we're at 24. Just another second or two here, and then we're going to move on. All right, 26. All right, let's go on here. So the first thing that we're going to do is review some proposed changes to the guiding principles. I'll just dive right into it. So what you see here on the left is the original above and then the proposed below with the changes in the blue. I'm not going to read the original. You can read that there, but proposed I will read just in case we've got any folks who were struggling to see it. The proposed is projects should protect or enhance natural resources and habitat and integrate nature into the recreational experience to further people's connection to nature. So the question is, do you agree with that proposed wording? Yes, no, maybe. Maybe is an option that we're going to figure out quite how to phrase that in the public meeting. Since this is a smaller format, we can potentially discuss some of this as we go along. Looking good so far. Everybody's liking it. I guess we've got a second here, so I'll read the original. Project should incorporate components which enhance natural habitat, but also should mesh nature and recreation to further people's connection to nature. Some of the feedback we heard, seeing this proposed, but a lot of people were wanting to be sure that we prioritize nature, and you'll see some more of that as we go through with the proposed criteria changes. Okay, we're at 24 with pretty overwhelming response, so I'm gonna jump on from here. This is exactly the same question. Please go ahead and respond, but I've got a question about the differential format next. So previous was a bar chart. This is a stoplight. Really what I'm wanting to figure out is what y'all think about the format for the public meeting. So respond here. We're going to use that previous question as the group's response. That was pretty unanimous. So this is another format that we can use that might communicate a little bit better to the public, or maybe that bar chart does. So I'm going to go into the next slide here. Do you prefer the bar chart or the traffic light format for the public meeting? Everything, just so you know, is set up for bar charts in this presentation. Wow. Again, pretty overwhelming response. All right, I think that answers that question. Sorry for the traffic light fan in the audience. It's not going to go your way. All right, we're going to go on from there. Okay, we've got another proposed guiding principle change. The original is
Jay?
project. Yes.
We had a maybe on the first one. Do we want to take the time to see if we can resolve any sort of maybe questions?
Sure. I'm going to jump back to here. Anyone who said maybe, would you like to unmute and jump in here? If you're good as is, we can go on, but please share any thoughts you've got on this one. We can talk it through pretty quickly, I expect.
I guess this also makes me wonder, with Menti, can somebody submit like a text-based answer? Like if they do other, okay.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that at the end of this when Rachel discusses it. Menti has a facility for that, but what we've been talking about is actually writing questions on index cards so that we can kind of during the presentation field and format and deal with those and then tackle it at the end.
Right.
Okay, jumping back to this guiding principle change. So the original is projects should honor and interpret cultural history, including traditions of use, both modern and historic. So the change here is primarily to incorporate Aboriginal and Indigenous into the language. So the proposed is projects should honor and interpret cultural history and traditions of use, including Aboriginal, Indigenous, historic, and modern. And again, the question is, do you agree with the new proposal? And if you've said maybe, I invite you to jump off mute and give your comments right now.
This is Herbie, and I would say this might be one thing to look at, which is I hit maybe by mistake. So there's really no way to go back and correct it to yes.
Can you not change directly to yes? It doesn't let you do that?
Once you hit submit, no.
Okay.
That would be something we can look at, Jay, just in terms of like functionality, because I noticed that as well. It kind of just keeps you moving, prompts you on to the next one.
Okay. Yeah, we'll take a look at that. We'll do a dry run, see if we can't change that. Anyone else who said no or maybe who'd like to give your thoughts?
Hey, it's Joe. I said no because now we're emphasizing one group over another.
Gotcha.
We're calling out one group.
Right.
But
so I think the intent was actually to differentiate a period. So maybe without changing that inclusion of that language of Aboriginal Indigenous, we can clarify it to say that we're not prioritizing a group, but rather we're calling out specifically a giant period of history. Would that answer the concern, Joe?
I think it still needs some wordsmithing because it says including. So were you excluding and now you're including?
It was just not clear before. This is an attempt to clarify.
Right. And it's a rhetorical question. I'm saying if you're using including, someone could say, well, were you excluding previously? And then also it's emphasizing one part of time over another part of time.
So then the suggestion, I think, from you, Joe, would be to basically not state time periods for this, but use language that's just holistic.
Correct.
Okay.
What if you changed including to such as?
What about if you, sorry.
Maurice
I was
has her
just
hand
gonna-
raised.
Yeah, go with Maurice first. She was being polite.
Whoops. I think part of the challenge is that the words modern and historic would lead to prehistoric, and remember we said that really isn't appropriate, and so it's it is a 10,000 to 12,000 year period epoch. So I don't know that we can get around the specificity of it. I mean, in Aboriginal Indigenous is pretty vague, actually. It's not like it's Lipan Apache, Topalong, Coatecan people. It is still a not an abstraction, but it's still a general term. It's my opinion.
And Suzanne?
I was just going to say something very similar to what Maurice was saying. I'm wondering if you could say project should honor and interpret the 12,000 years of history or something like that. Would that be, could you do something like that? I mean, I know this issue came up at the Alamo, and I'm trying to figure out how they resolved it, because that was same issue of, what is the span of history that we are looking at. And I think that some of the comments that were in the rooms on land that we were having is that people were just wanting to make sure that we were honoring all periods of history. And I don't know how you can say
Suzanne,
that.
technically not history. That's the problem. History is written. It's not. Yeah.
So what did you say? 12,000 years of use or something, or I don't know. I mean, I'm just trying to get a sense of, otherwise, the concern that we had, the concern that was expressed in our rooms was that people were concerned that it's not showing the vast part of the history. And that was where we were trying to figure out how to show that we included all. And so the historians are better at this than I, but that was the issue.
I think Randall, you've got a comment. Randall, go ahead. Oh.
Randy, you're unmuted,
Randy?
so we should be able to hear you. Randy, if you can find the chat feature, why don't you type your comment in the chat?
And then Vince.
There's a few suggestions on the chat, actually.
Yeah, mine's in the chat. I just said you could take out both modern and historic and put in over 12,000 years. So projects should honor and interpret cultural history, including traditions of use over 12,000 years.
All right. Yeah, Vince, I think that actually captures a number of the comments all in one. I think we need to move on. We'll come back with some wording that addresses that concern. Yeah, to Randy's point, we can't expect 100% from our group, let alone the public. But you know, we're working towards it. Okay. So we've got 3 proposed new principles from different groups, which seem to talk about very similar things. And so we've got 3 slightly different wordings here, all of which are trying to get at the same thing. And so we're going to ask this as an A, B, or C option. So option A, projects should incorporate strategies to combat climate change and utilize nature-based solutions. Option B, does the project balance ecological or natural resources with built resources? And then option C, does the project consist of sustainability goals? Or I might say include sustainability goals.
A comment. I think A and C are pretty similar, but I think B is a different thing potentially. And we heard something along the lines of B in a few rooms, maybe 3 out of the 4.
Yeah.
And that was kind of getting at, there's this word reconciling kind of the, you know, his structures versus natural resources, vegetation. Right.
Okay, so I think there's a pretty clear, just taken straight, preference for B out of these 3. But to your point, Corey, maybe what we can do here is include B, and it looks like I can reset the results, and we can vote A against C. Do you think that's reasonable?
Is this a replacement for the lid one that was there before, or in addition to?
Those are in the criteria. This is a guiding principle, so I think likely what will come out of this is we'll replace those in the criteria with an overall guiding principle.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
And Vince?
Just the person who voted C is willing to change to B.
Okay, thanks.
Well, and another kind of, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, is there, by forming a guiding principle now in the form of a question, does it change anything as opposed to just kind of edicts and now we have a question? I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there.
I think that's a good point. I think we will end up rephrasing B away from a question and into a statement to make it a principle. Projects should balance.
Point. Freitas, that's why I chose A, was because the question seemed odd to me.
And I was just going to say for A or C, there's probably existing language in the climate action and adaptation plan that's been adopted by council that we can borrow from regarding like public projects.
Okay.
Yeah, A came up in one of the rooms that they were like, why isn't climate change mentioned as a guiding principle? They just felt strongly that, you know, that should be something that we should all be thinking about these days. So.
Jay,
yes.
Mary Jane has joined us and she doesn't have somebody put the Minty code in. Yeah. So Mary Jane, if you just go to minty.com and put in that code that Selena wrote, you should be able to access where we are.
And Jay, I'll make a note of that for a public outreach that we can have the QR codes and we'll have the code readily available for folks if they come in and out.
Great. Okay, Corey, did you want to vote A versus C, or should we go on from here?
I mean, I think they can be combined somehow.
Okay. All right, we'll look at doing that. Okay, so new principle. And this is brand new. And this is actually something that had been a criterion in the land group, specifically that projects should include funding for long-term maintenance of natural features. But we heard in the land group, in almost every group, that we needed to broaden that, and it made sense to change it to a guiding principle. So this principle is projects should be implemented for long-term sustainability of the project itself, that is, including a plan and funding of maintenance, operations, and programming. So the question is whether it's a good addition, a bad addition, or something that we need to talk about a little bit. And Derek, I see your comment. This feels like a screening criterion, not a guiding principle. And I think as we work towards the implementation of the criteria and the guiding principles, I think we're going to find that the guiding principles are going to be screening criteria. That would be my guess as to how our eventual methodology is structured. But that's kind of the next phase here. For those who've said, let's discuss, do you want to jump in with comments?
This is Derek. That was my comment. That's
Gotcha.
why.
Yeah, I mean, similar thinking. Like this is something, yeah, all projects should do. I don't know that this helps us weigh or evaluate projects. It's more of like an operational, like good thing to do.
Yeah, so while folks continue voting here, to pull back the curtain a little bit on some of my thinking, it's what I said before. And what we've talked about on the project team a bit is that there are likely to be two different ways that projects get evaluated. There's going to be this guiding principle layer, and we have established those as things that are critical for all projects to do. So if a project can't meet one of our guiding principles, it's probably not a project that needs to move forward. And so there's like a level of screening with the guiding principles, currently thinking that if you can't meet that, it's not a project that moves forward to prioritization at all. And then the criteria are all about prioritizing which projects should receive public funding first, kind of thing. So I don't know if that helps clarify a little bit. Okay, that's pretty overwhelming. We're going to keep going unless there's any more discussion. Okay, jumping into the criteria, and I'll read what's on the screen, I'll run the show, but I would specifically invite folks who are in these rooms to speak up about the wording proposed. First one's a pretty simple one. The original was, does the project maintain the historic character of the river? And we're just adding comprehensive. Does the project maintain the comprehensive historic character of the river?
The question we kept getting over and over, because this was the first criteria we started with in every room, was what's historic? Like, how is that determined? Who determines that? So.
Hey, it's Joe again. I think comprehensive might be a solution to that one we were having the conversation about history and modern. The comprehensive historic might be a term to use.
Gotcha. Okay, I've made that note. All right, we've got a no. please feel free to jump in and give your thoughts if you like.
Well, that was me, because, and I would be interested to see where Derek and, this River Authority staff come down on this, but, the river has changed, and, a lot over time. And, just like with the walls on the river, I hate to bring up a, sensitive subject, but, the walls, what is it, what were the walls there? Were the trees there? What was the historic character? And, going back and forth, I'm curious as to how this would be used if you're trying to make a project improvement that is restoring, the functionality of the river, or ensuring that it's going to be protected from erosion upstream because of the upstream impervious cover that's causing more flow through the river. You may need to put in some structures along the river that protect the river, that may not be its historic character, but it's protecting the river or protecting the adjacent banks, etc. So I'm just curious, I'm going to yield to the River Authority on this, but sometimes the projects may need to evolve based on the character of the river and the flow and the, other threats, the environmental threats that are coming in, like flow from street runoff, or like, for example, when we did the big Hildebrand project and added that huge culvert into the river, that was not the historic character of the river. It was done because it needed to maintain or to manage the flow. So I'm just bringing that up. Are we setting ourselves in a box that may not be appropriate given the changing conditions of what is impacting the river from outside of the park? So I'm just going to leave it at that. Thank you.
Yeah, Suzanne, this is Derek. I'm struggling with this one for those same reasons. Something that may maintain the historic character could increase flooding. There's a whole variety of scenarios. I understand what the team is, wrestling with. This one is a little ugh. But maybe respect, as I'm watching in the comments.
Yeah. Suzanne, any thoughts on changing
that
maintain
might be
to respect?
It's tough.
Well, I would say, does the project, you could say, respect and function. There's a function to the river too. And I just want to make sure that there is a sense of the fact that it's not just the character, but it's the function. And because the river does provide a purpose in the management of water. And so maybe there's some way of combining the historic and the function, or or public safety. Does it respect and maintain the comprehensive historic character and I don't know, public safety seems like a little, I don't think that's the right word. Anyway, I just think there needs to be a balance between history and function.
Yeah, I was going to say there's one coming up that talks about flooding as well. So it's kind of like recreation versus natural ecology. It's a similar problem. Go ahead, Brian. Sorry.
Yeah, no, when this came up a few meetings ago, I recall this being less about the physical nature of the river, but more about how people feel, interact, not necessarily the potential natural channel design features or hardscaping to protect flooding or things of that nature, but it was more the interaction of people with the river and what it's meant historically or meant over 12,000 years to our community. That's what I recall the conversation being about when this question came up 3 meetings ago or so. And it's a hard one to digest, quite honestly.
This is Bill, following up on what you're just saying, Brian. What if we said, does the project balance historic and environmental or ecological character of the river? Balance or whether it's balance or respect, but and I would take out the word comprehensive.
Taylor, I think you got your hand up.
Yes. I think from the neighborhood perspective, the reason comprehensive is important is because there was a desire not to privilege like one period of history or a historical feature over others, and make sure that the whole history of the community is concerned. I don't think that this is intended in terms of like balancing the history and ecology so much as making sure that in terms of like historical preservation, there is a more comprehensive view of the entire history of the river and the different ways that community has interacted with it, rather than just like one particular time period. And that's where the comprehensive came from. And I think that's, for neighborhood community people, more like what they were hoping for with this type of question.
Vince.
Yeah, I just think that Jay, maybe you could take us back to the big picture now and then, just so these are guiding principles, and they're not going to agree with each other exactly, but that's why you have a group of them. So if we could sort of maintain the big focus on the whole group of guiding principles used to evaluate projects, not each principle has to deal with all the nuances.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I'd actually kick it over to Allison, hearing all this discussion. Allison, do you have a good sense of where to go with the wording of this?
I think maybe as it's proposed, maybe changing maybe potentially changing maintain to respect, as Suzanne suggested. I think maybe that's a good add, but I think there's other guiding principles that cover some of the other things that we're talking about. And then specifically the criteria kind of gets into that as well.
Yeah. And we are in the criteria now, by the way.
Balancing of the two, the historic versus ecology versus, but I think what everybody said was, I completely agree with. I think it's tricky, right?
Derek, yes.
Yeah, just sort of a general comment that probably applies here, but maybe overall, to the point of, some of these things may be touched on in other either river principles or in the overall guiding principles. If there's a way in the software to show the other things that are being discussed, or that, the other like river guiding principles, so it's an easy reference, because it may, to Vince's point, there's that comprehensive look. Even if they're in conflict with each other. I don't know if that's doable, but I think it may help maintain the bigger picture as the public goes through this.
Yeah, we'll investigate some ways to do that. I mean, we can't really show it on screen because we're limited with information density, but in the room on the 30th, we can post things, we can have everything up on the wall at the same time. So yeah, we'll look at a way to do that. Parker, I think you've got your hand up.
Hey, would it help to separate it out from the historic culture and the historic ecology? Because it seems like it gets conflated on what we're talking about. Are we talking about the ecology, or are we talking about the historical culture of the river and its impact on the community? And so would it help to separate them out?
And kind of defer to Allison there as far as the intent of this. It sounded like it was more cultural.
Yeah, I think people were just very concerned about it wasn't defined as what historic was actually covering. Bill, feel free to jump in and if you have any thoughts, but I think people were, a lot about what we heard was they didn't want it to be this like concrete ditch,
Yeah, and I've been hearing that for a long time, but no, historic, as everyone knows, we keep dancing around or dancing with that word, and we'll continue to do that because historic is just it's a living, breathing beast. But once again, Derek, I think nailed it early on. Is this this could be a real issue anytime you're either adding to or taking something out. Either way, this statement as it is would be problematic.
Yeah, I think we're going to need to move on. We've got quite a bit of ground to cover. So
Yeah, let me work on some proposed changes to this one based on kind of what everybody said, and I'll throw it back to the river group and see if we can, you know, get something a little bit more different that we want to propose.
Okay, great. Next is another addition to an original proposing. So the original is, does the project increase access to the river? And we're adding where appropriate to the end of that. Does the project increase access to the river where appropriate? So do you agree? Yes, no, or maybe? All right, we're looking good here. I'm going to move on before anyone can say maybe. That's 24 yeses with no nos or maybes. Great. Okay, next. The original, does the project preserve and improve the river ecology? And we're adding contribute to. So does the project preserve, improve, or contribute to river ecology? And I think that this, to the comments about context and the overall here, you know, some of the things that we talked about on one of the previous criterion is shown here. So we are talking about ecology in a very direct fashion. So we've got a maybe.
Jay, does it feel necessary to say contribute positively, or do we have that assertive with contribute?
Yeah, that was the maybe, Jay. Just contribute a beneficial contribution to the river. It's just something to, you know, I don't know, just make certain that we're contributing. We're not contributing some kind of invasive or bad thing to the river ecology.
Yeah, that seems like an easy wording change. Does that work for you, Allison?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. All right. Keep going here. See the same comment from Sarah. Thank you. All right. Next, the original. Does the recreation project, or if it's a recreation project, does it negatively impact ecology? So changing that to, does the proposed recreational use appropriately integrate with natural ecology? And again, agree, yes, no, maybe. Joe, please.
I guess I'm having trouble with the word appropriately, because what's appropriate to me might be different to you.
Yeah.
Could you leave it out? Proposed recreation.
Well, so I think keeping the end goal of all of this in mind and how it's going to be used is critical. So I think where we're headed is there's going to be a group of people who are going to use this methodology that we come up with, probably a rubric at the end, whether that group is the very people you see on the call here or some other group. So they are ultimately going to interpret things like that, because you're quite right. That can be interpreted in a number of different ways, and it will be at different times. But defining anything more specifically than that, I think, isn't really technically feasible within the effort that we're putting together, if that makes sense.
Okay. I don't know if I understood all that. I think you're saying someone's going to look at it with a different lens, and they'll have to parcel out what's appropriate and not appropriate.
Exactly.
With more expertise than perhaps we do. Okay, I got it.
Okay, we've got 21 yeses. I think we'll keep rolling here. still in the river. So the original, does the project restrict access to the river for spiritual connections? And this is primarily flipping that on its head and widening it a little bit. So does the project allow access to the river for ongoing diverse interests and uses? And if you
So
said,
adding the word safe before access, safe access to the river.
it seems reasonable enough.
So I was one of the maybes. So on the ongoing diverse interest and uses, is that defines in any way? Like you've now broadened it so much that it does it really guide? Or is it the more diverse uses it includes, is that how it ranks up better?
Allison, you want to jump in on that?
I don't disagree with you. This was a proposed wording change, so I put it in there. But I think, initially the group wanted to try to respond to some of the comments from the past related to spiritual access. And some of those same people were the ones in the group who proposed this wording change. I got the sense that people wanted to make sure that even if a construction project was going on, that they wanted to be able to access a site for whatever and whenever. And so I think maybe they thought spiritual was too narrow. So they wanted to try to broaden that. So I think, Corey, to your point, adding safe access is probably a good one to address some of that. Yeah. And I'll encourage any other thoughts from the group on this one.
Seems like the ongoing is very time bound. I mean, we're doing this today in 2024, but these criteria are supposed to live. There could be other, maybe if we're going to keep it diverse interest, maybe just for diverse interest and not the time bound nature of ongoing.
So strike ongoing. Tony, you've got your hand up.
I think that we need to keep spiritual. I think we're damned if we do and damned if we don't on it. But I think there needs to be a reference to the spiritual and ongoing diverse interests.
So that was quiet. You got that, Allison?
Yeah, I did.
Can you repeat it?
Yes, she thinks that we need to keep the spiritual connections. Damned if we do, damned if we don't was to quote Miss Tony, but that she thinks we need to say access to the river for spiritual and ongoing diverse interests and uses. Is that correct? Okay.
What if we got rid of ongoing and uses and just said allow access to the river for diverse interests?
I think that'd be okay.
Then it becomes a personal, your personal thought that you would vote on this or whatever you're doing as the general public. I guess what's the difference between interest and use? Or is use embedded in your interest?
I guess interest is like what you want to do, but then the use is how you use it, whether you ride your bike up to it or you walk up to it or.
Yeah, Tony, did you want to add anything? I see your hand is up. You're on mute, Tony.
I think that I think there's too much going on in this sentence. Actually, I think that what is our intent here? We want to allow access to the river for whatever you want to do. Is that, I mean,
I think that was the goal.
okay, so we want to make it as broad as possible, right?
Well, that was the proposed change.
Okay, so maybe it's just to allow access to the river for spiritual and other interests, period.
Okay, I'll work on this one.
And Maurice?
I would just, Allison, avoid the word other. Tony, that's just, it's a differentiation that you probably don't want to get into, but diverse would be, spiritual and diverse would be probably more ecumenical.
Agreed. Thank you.
Okay, any other thoughts before we move here? Okay, keep going. So this is a new criterion for the river. Does the project mitigate flooding of surrounding areas? So yes, this is a good addition. No, it's not. And let's discuss. And let's go ahead and discuss.
This is Derek. That's mine. My concern is not every project is going to mitigate. It's just as long as it doesn't make it worse.
Okay.
So kind of back to you, how we're going to use these, just simplistically, it seems like a project which actually does mitigate would get a point here, whereas a project which does not mitigate would not get a point in terms of the prioritization of projects. So there is space in this for projects which don't mitigate or which maintain, if that makes sense.
I guess if you're using it as a screening criteria, though, to your earlier point, if
But
it's a
this
yes,
wouldn't,
no,
this wouldn't be.
okay. Because
Yeah,
I think you're going to confuse people. I think if you're screening in some and not in others, and I'm reading that as a potential screening.
Yeah, I think intent is that this would not, and there's, you make a very good point. There's a whole level of thought and explanation that's going to have to happen with how these are used. That is the topic for, it's a topic for the future with this group and with the public. We've got 5 discuss. Anyone else want to jump in?
I put a let's discuss it. It seems that this is a different tone to what we're trying to achieve here. I mean, this is, as Derek said, this is a very specific monitoring. So is there enough? You definitely don't want a project that will increase flooding or be dangerous. You absolutely don't. But mitigate is an action word, right? So I don't know. I mean, how many projects are going to actually mitigate flooding? You should not increase flooding or put the river in danger and anybody in danger. I'm just wondering if this is a guiding principle. That's my question.
Your question is, Maurice, whether this should be a guiding principle or whether it should stay as a criterion?
To me, yeah, it's not really, I'm sorry. Yeah, I guess it's, I understand it's not a guiding principle. It's not in the spirit of guiding principles. I mean, it is a specific criteria, but it just seems very specific. Derek, I don't know. Is there a way to just not increase flood? I don't know.
Yeah, Maurice, I mean, I started going into sort of phrasing it as a negative.
Yeah.
Does the project negatively impact flooding?
Yeah, that's kind of more, I think, in the spirit of what we might want to think about, because
okay.
Yeah.
And Suzanne? You're on mute.
I just want to note that, how are we defining park here? Because there are going to be aspects of this park that are intended to flood. I mean, parks flood. The golf course floods. There are low-lying areas of the park that will flood. I mean, they do flood, and you're not necessarily going to mitigate against that because there are areas of the park that will flood. And so I guess my concern is that I agreeing with Derek in the fact that we need to be careful because there could be opportunities where the park may see flooding. I know it says flooding in surrounding areas, but that is so nebulous. I mean, there's flooding on Broadway, there's flooding all over. Does that mean that we're going to increase the size of Catawba Pershing that's going to take over park area? So I just think the idea of public safety and encourage, doesn't adversely affect flooding, those kinds of things, I think is a better way of doing it versus that there's not going to be flooding, because as Marie said, there is flooding and there will be flooding.
Yeah, I think the loudest voices on this one were very concerned about homes in the surrounding area.
Irby, I think you've got your hand up.
Yeah, my only question, and really for Suzanne and Eric, is if you said downstream, would that help? Downstream flooding and take out, or make it clear that you're not talking about the park.
Yeah, maybe I should make it more clear that we're talking about like homes.
Homes or structures or something.
Yeah.
Outside of the park. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right, Irby. Yeah, okay.
Allison, you good there?
I'm good.
Okay.
I'll propose something different and pass it around.
Another new criterion, does the project include nature-based solutions? And yes, this is a good addition to the criteria. No, this is not a good addition to the criteria, or let's discuss.
So might this just be incorporated into the one we were just discussing?
Allison, was this one specific to flooding, or is this a more general?
This is more general to projects related to the river. Do they include nature-based solutions?
Okay. Suzanne, do you still have your hand up, or is that from before? No?
No, I'm
okay.
sorry.
Yeah. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, this came out of, I think, the one that we were in. And they didn't have a good understanding of what the term we originally used.
So Joe, this is actually separate. We've got a change on ours, to your point. You're exactly right, but this is a different one.
Yeah, this is related to the river. This is room number 4. They had Larry Clark and some other people that are very, that were very pushing on the nature-based solutions.
Well,
and ecology.
I think it's a great term. I don't know if the general public is going to say or understand what that means, but maybe we want it that way because nature is a provocative word and solutions means it's a positive. But I just think that this would not be helpful to the general public of understanding what they're voting on.
I tend to agree. I mean, based on our last discussion of the last item and how it seems to be getting very specific, this one also seems to be getting very specific into the, like, this is how you're going to design the project.
Right. Well, and if it's already in land or something inland, maybe we need to look at the two together at some point.
Yeah. Tony, you've got your hand up.
I don't know what nature-based solutions are. Okay. I mean, I need that defined for me. So,
So I think one example would be, if there's, and Tony, we're getting some feedback on you, if you wouldn't mind muting. An example would be if there's flooding, and you can deal with that through, for example, a concrete lined retention area, or you could have a vegetated swale that uses plants to slow runoff and to absorb water into the soil. So the latter is a nature-based solution. The former is just some concrete.
I mean, the other thing for this committee to be thinking about as we go through these is whether or not these need to be proposed to the public at all. If the committee is not happy with some of these, I think we should strike them, maybe.
Mary Jane, is this a guiding principle? I think that we've got, Allison, help me remember, I don't think we shifted, and to your question, Sarah, low impact development into the guiding principles, did we?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
They're in the
criteria. So Mary Jane, as it stands now, it is not a guiding principle. Do you want to discuss whether we should shift this? And if we've got it in several groups now, should we discuss whether we bump this up into guiding principles? Mary Jane, you're on mute.
I'm really thinking that the way I was reading this is that we were making it a guiding principle. I don't think it should be. I think it's just a criteria
Right.
for judging a project, but it's not, shouldn't be a guiding principle because not every project is gonna
Right.
within
Incorporate that. Okay, well, that's the way we've got it now. It is a proposed new criteria, and it is not a guiding principle.
Okay, sorry about that.
Suzanne, I think you've got your hand up again.
Yeah, I think I was getting along the same lines. I mean, it's going to be in land. It's now going to be in the river. I don't know if any of the other categories, any of the other, I guess, so it really depends on how this is going to be used and how we're going to define it. But I do think it's this, what came up in the land section is a lot about the respect for nature, using nature-based alternatives versus everything going into a more hardened or adding impervious cover, that sort of thing. So I guess in managing this, it's really trying to the idea of using solutions that are using nature, natural infrastructure, something to that effect. I know the words are all over the place. We tried to get away from LID because low impact development is a term that a lot of people don't understand. Nature-based solutions is a little bit easier in the fact that it does have the word nature in it, but it still seems like a technical term that people don't quite understand. So I do understand the confusion, but I think the concept, at least in the land section, was to have a preference for projects that are more using nature to solve to mitigate the additional impervious cover that could come in with a more hardened surface project.
Irby, did you have a comment, or is your hand just up from before? Derek, go ahead.
Yeah, to Suzanne's point, there is always confusion from the public about LID or nature-based or green infrastructure, but I would say my sense is nature-based solutions is a better term and a little bit simpler for people to go with. And LID seems to have some negative connotations with certain groups. So I would, wherever it might be in all the principles and such, I would lean towards nature-based solutions versus other terms.
Okay. All right, let's keep moving. Gonna leave you with that one, Allison. On to the archaeology and architecture group. So Vince, similarly, please feel free to chime in here. Again, a change to a criterion. The original, does the project enhance the public's comprehensive understanding of the park? And proposed, does the project enhance the public's understanding of the park's full history and layered culture? Forgive me, I got distracted by a giant raccoon walking across in front of my office.
Oh my gosh.
And if you've said no here, please feel free to unmute and chime in. Joe?
It goes back to public understanding for me on layered culture. I don't think they'll know what they're voting on or discussing. Why does it have to be layered?
I think we're just trying to unpack the word comprehensive, meaning that it's multiple things to multiple people. And so there might be things that even are not obvious to the general public that should be respected as part of a project. Maurice, did you want to add?
You're on mute, Maurice.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you, Corey. That was great. But Joe, also the idea of layered refers to the archaeology, so that that's how that kind of deep time, and so this idea that some things are not on top of the ground, but are in fact part of the layering of ancient or Aboriginal culture. So it's an archaeological reference.
Right, and the general public's not going to understand that.
And Vince?
Well, you could just leave out the word layered. I mean, I think this was a suggestion of the public, but you can just say full history and culture. I mean, I'm always in favor of making things simpler, especially when you're dealing with big criteria.
All right, Rachel?
I agree on that front in terms of simplification.
Okay. Corey, I guess, did you assemble these?
Yes.
Are you
Me
good
and Vince
with?
and Maurice kind of work together on it.
Great. I'll keep going here unless y'all want to. All right. Next, the original. Does the project enhance the interpretation of the water story of the park? And proposed adds to that, does it enhance the ecological and cultural story of the park? And do you agree? Yes, no, or as always, maybe?
And I will say, like in all of our rooms, mostly it was an emphatic yes to interpreting the water story, but I think people just didn't want it to imply that that was the most important story or the only story. So we just kind of broadened it with this additional statement.
Okay. All right, I think we're looking pretty good here. Oh, we've got a maybe. Anyone want to chime in? Sorry, Tony?
Just real quick, I think that it would be a run-on, but I think we can combine it to be one sentence. I think making it two separate sentences, it's almost like prioritizing. So I think that we could make it a good run-on sentence, and does it enhance the interpretation of the water story of the park and the ecological and cultural story?
Okay, thank you for that. Anyone else? Okay, we're gonna keep going here. So the original, does the project unify areas throughout the park? And I believe that we heard pretty unanimously that that was not actually an interest. And so the proposed reword is, does the project reinforce the unique and distinctive character areas of the park? So this essentially turns that on its head.
Mm-hmm.
Picking up steam here, looking good. Well, folks are answering. Don't think it's lost on us that this presentation is brutal. I mean, this is going through in deep detail, word by word, with interpretations of what the public has said. And so this is kind of excruciating, and it's going to be excruciating on the 30th, and that is okay. It's what it needs to be, as far as I can tell. So thanks for sticking with us through all of this. Okay, we're unanimous here up to 20, so I'm going to go on to the next one. The original. Can the building be adapted to increase longevity? And this again is a refocus. Does the project utilize historic structures in order to increase their utility or useful life? Anything you want to say on this one while we wait on responses, Corey?
Yeah, a lot of people were confused by the idea of increasing longevity. It's sort of an awkward way to say adaptive reuse. So using the words utility or useful got more public understanding.
Great. Okay, we've hit our magic 20. Let's keep rolling. The original. Is the project accessible for public use? And proposed, does the project increase or result in space that is accessible for public use? We'll have agreement on this one. Give it another second here. Okay, there's our 20.
Going back to that one, Jay, sorry. I mean, there was a question of the word exclusive before public use that came up like once or twice, a couple times, but I think that's getting at something that's not really the intent of this criteria.
Okay. Next one, the original. Does the project enhance understanding and interpretation of the park? And proposed expands on that. Does the project enhance understanding and interpretation of historic and culturally significant uses of the park?
This is one that we got strong reactions around in all 4 rooms. They wanted to add this idea of historic and culturally significant uses. Isn't that right, Corey?
I mean, yeah, this is the language that we finally landed on after hearing several similar things. Yeah. I think this language kind of ties it all together.
Okay. We've got a maybe. Feel free to jump in. Freitas?
Yeah, I mean, I voted yes for it, but not every project is going to. I mean, and I guess some projects just they won't get this point, you know, on the rubric, on the scoring rubric.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other way to look at this, as I think we've talked about previously, is that as projects are proposed and designed, having a criterion like this means that designers and the folks who are proposing the project will look at this as a good thing because they want to score the points. And so projects are much more likely to include this if we're naming it. Other comments?
I know that Sarah mentioned she's having issues with her microphone, but she mentioned the ecological use, and I guess that's in another one. We've already talked about the telling the story, the water story, the nature story. Isn't that in another criteria somewhere? Interpretation of the ecological.
I believe we've got that in land. Suzanne, do you recall?
I don't remember. I mean,
Yeah.
There's so many, because I just remember we just talked about the water story in something that Corey, you know, said just 2 things before that. So,
Yep.
So I don't know. I'm just mentioning Sarah's comment because her microphone isn't working, but I don't think this prohibits there to be a water or an ecological story. I think this is just another, you know, aspect of the historical interpretation. It's not. I believe, because didn't we have one just 2 slides ago that said the water story?
Did.
Yeah.
I think we did. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Land. All right. The original, does the project promote the natural ecosystem by incorporating native plant materials and removing invasive species? We heard a lot about invasive species and non-native species and differentiating. And so this is an attempt to reword and clarify and add in a concept here. So does the project incorporate native and climate adapted plant materials? So with the thought that something that is native is not necessarily always the best choice for the next 50 to 100 years as the climate changes. And so we're trying to capture that concept in the wording as well. And I like it because it removes lots of words.
Did we still say non-invasive though? Climate adapted and non-invasive plant materials? As a non-plant expert.
Suzanne, that seems okay to you and Freitas and the others in my group there?
Yeah, I think that was the biggest issue. They didn't want to say non-natives, but they did agree that the invasives were. The challenge that we got into, Corey, is a lot of people were defining what does that mean. I mean, obviously a lot of people agreed that they didn't want more bamboo, but they didn't say that there are some other things that are non-native and are good in the park. So yeah, I don't know,
Yeah.
but I agree that the invasives.
Maybe it could be, does the project incorporate non-invasive, native, and climate adapted plant materials?
That would be fine with me.
Okay. We've got a maybe. Is there a comment? The original, does the project promote natural ecology in concert with recreation access? The proposed, and I've actually, Suzanne, this is one where I've reworded a little bit from a comment you'd made. Does the project prioritize natural ecology while also incorporating nature-focused recreational access where appropriate? This goes back to something we heard quite a bit. People have opinions on the balance of nature and recreation, and that opinion is that we need to prioritize nature. So this is an attempt to keep that balance of ecology and recreation while being clear, a little bit more clear than we were before, that natural ecology is the priority there. Maybe anyone want to discuss?
I guess I'm just a little confused by what nature-focused recreation is. Is that fishing, or do the people who do tightrope walking?
Suzanne, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think that the desire was to make sure that to give criteria that would prioritize recreational uses that are nature focused. So fishing and walking and biking and things that are using versus maybe a pickleball court or something like that may not necessarily be a nature focused recreational. The public just wanted us to give more priority to those things that are recreation with nature.
Yeah. Taylor, did you have a comment?
I echoing Suzanne's comments. I think there was a desire for, from the public perspective, for ensuring there's not like new built things that don't perhaps fit the previous uses of the park. But I do have some reservations about nature focused being a little bit too prescriptive, since it's a very in terms of equitability and access. I think that may become an issue when we go into community conversation, because I don't know that, because the park is used by such a diverse group of people, I'm going to anticipate that in the public meeting, if we include something like nature focused, there's going to be, and also this is something to consider in terms of like, are we setting a new, are we establishing a new use for the park if we are going to disconsider traditional uses as a driving park that now encompass like lowrider communities, motorcycle gangs, accessibility in terms of like, you know, having driving access to picnic areas. I think there will be a lot of discussion around nature focused and what that means, and if it's too prescriptive for the diversity of community in the park. And that nature focused wording, I think we may want to look at a little bit more.
What about compatible, nature compatible, or compatible, incorporating recreational access compatible with nature, or some word in that, you know, thesaurus that could think about it's compatible, not necessarily focused. It wouldn't, it could complement nature versus it being.
Or even complement might be better than compatible.
Yeah.
Something involving complementary. Because yeah, I have heard this in reporting back to neighborhoods like several times over the weekend. There's like a very adamant desire to make sure those who have used the park and its history as like a driving access park is part of how we interpret the uses of the park in the future.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, I'm not saying nobody, a majority of people would not want to see like a new tennis court type of use go in, but there would be a concern about being so focused on like natural ecology or different kinds of nature uses that would then take away, you know, 100 years of history that is accessible for public use to the community in the park. So.
Okay, we'll work on that complementary language. Hear that concern. The original. Does the project incorporate low impact development features? So we've talked about this before. Proposed is, does the project incorporate natural or green infrastructure, also known as low impact development features, and maximize the benefits of nature for public health, habitat, and environmental sustainability? And we've got an extra word in there. Sorry about that. Okay, we've got a no. Please speak up.
This is Derek. That's me. I think you need to stick with nature-based solutions, but not jump around in terms of terms. And green infrastructure will do that.
It does answer the nature-based, or it needs to be changed?
I think you should. I would get rid of natural or green infrastructure, and I would also get rid of low-impact development features. I would say nature-based solutions covers that whole chunk.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Let's use similar terms. That way you only have to define them once, you know?
I agree.
Okay, got it. There's maybe any other thoughts before we roll on? Okay. Original. Tony, sorry. You're on mute.
That last one has more words in it than several of the previous ones. There's just a lot of words in it. So if you could work on cutting it down, I mean, I think some of the comments that were made about getting rid of some of the words, but it's just really long. And it's got a lot of stuff going on in it, so.
It does. Yeah. Okay, well, we'll see if we can simplify it. Certainly getting rid of natural, all of that language will help.
Yeah, it struck me as being the longest one that we have, so.
Okay. Original, does the project enhance the availability of park open space? And proposed, does the project enhance the availability of park space available for free and open rather than predetermined types of use? So this one, people really didn't understand what park open space meant. And we're generally interpreting it as something like a big lawn. And that's not the intent, as I understand it, from when we developed these criteria. Rather, it was space that you could use on your own in a way that you determined, rather than having a predetermined use set for you, like a softball field you use to play softball. Whereas a lot of the areas in the park now, you can have a picnic, you can walk, you can play Frisbee. So I see there's a lot of concern about this one. Let's talk it through. Anyone? Maurice, please.
Well, first of all, I don't understand what I know you just described what predetermined types of use is, but I don't think a general public would hear what you just said,
Okay.
reading predetermined types of use. It's not meaningful.
I think there's too many words here. It could be shortened. Enhance free and open park space maybe is a better way and take it. You have availability and then available to the same word again. It just needs to be pared down and more succinct.
Okay. Taylor?
I think this question actually might even need to be removed. I don't think the understanding like the evaluators project team committee has of like what open spaces and the public have is the same. I think what is a priority for the public that we've heard many times, and speaking as a neighborhood person, is that it is a public park, it is the people's park. And there is this question, I think people will be very confused by because there is a preference for it to continue to be a very flexible park. I think there's concern about nature uses being so design oriented that you wouldn't have your typical family able to use open space in the park. I think there's concern about commercialization of different pieces of the park. And I think this question just muddies the waters intensely and leaves too much room for interpretation. I don't think this speaks to a public priority at all. And I like the new proposed wording even less than the park open space wording. I think a lot of people will just be like, what is the point of this even? And I think this may not even be really a priority so much as preserving public access and use of the park from a neighborhood community perspective.
Okay, so I think that this criterion then has a critical flaw because it's meant to address those very things. So if that's not coming through, we've got to reword the whole thing. So open space, free, and flexible, I think are all words that get to what you're talking about, Taylor. It's park space that isn't developed, that isn't given over to private use. So I guess I don't agree. I don't understand the disconnect, rather.
I think that right now the community understands this as the people's park. And so there is, even if access to spaces were free in the sense that you don't have to buy a ticket, the word free is confusing because basically if we've had this many questions about the wording of this, I think we need to kind of rethink and through the lens of, is this something that are we not only limiting access in terms of like it costing someone some money to use it, or but also is the space welcoming for everyone? So like if there's a project that has such a strict interpretation or limits availability of use to such an extent that existing uses in the park or existing public uses of the park would become more limited, is like where people would be concerned. So like thinking through some conversations I've had, for example, if you have an open space now that is currently used for everything from soccer to picnics to camping on Easter, if we do a natural ecology improvement to such an extent by putting in a new native plant garden that you're taking out open space that no longer is available for those uses, would families that currently use it for any of those things lose park space that they currently rely on? Right. I think that's where the concern has come up from members of the public.
Okay, but time out. This asks if it enhances the availability of park open space. So I think those are consistent. I'm not getting the disconnect.
I think what I'm critiquing is the proposed
Okay.
language where it's free and open rather than predetermined types of use.
Okay.
And so that's why like the original wording I think is better.
Gotcha.
I think
Gotcha.
the proposed is too complex. And just trying to provide context of like what the community concerns are.
Yeah, thank you. I understand now. Yeah, apologies for being a little slow there. Others have comments. I think someone's got their hand up there. Parker.
Yeah, I wonder, are we more concerned about preserving rather than enhancing the open space?
I think so. Yeah, this says enhance the availability of, perhaps we could just say preserve. So we've got a lot of maybes here. I'm going to reset the results. If you wouldn't mind re-voting, yes or no. So do you agree with the proposed wording? A no would be, let's keep the original. A yes would be, let's go with proposed. And a maybe means, let's talk about it some more. Okay. Looks good. I think we've got some clear direction there. Thank you for that. Let's go on. The original, does the project increase the amount of natural areas? Proposed, does the project maintain or increase the amount of natural area within the park as a whole? So obviously maintain versus just increase, that's a qualifier there, but I think there was, within the park as a whole is intended to capture situations where there might be a project that builds something, but then mitigates the area where it's developed by increasing the amount of natural area otherwise. So a trade-off there. Please go ahead. Anyone have a comment there? Joe?
The idea of maintain came up in land a lot about putting dollars in order to maintain the park. And so I think this is a little conflated. And does the project sustain or increase the amount of natural area might be a better term, because maintain was certainly used for taking care of the park in our discussions.
Could I further suggest preserve? We've used that word quite a bit, and so this would be consistent with that. Joe, would that be okay, or do you think sustain is the way to go?
But maintain, I think, has a connotation that you're not intending here.
Yeah, I hear that. Taylor.
Just want to uplift Corey's comment in the chat. Do natural areas compete with open space? I don't think that that is the intention of this question or the previous one, but as we think about the wording, I think that is something we need to consider carefully. I think a big community concern is, even though there's a desire for natural ecology to be preserved and improved, does that limit the use of the park? So just making sure those questions are not in conflict with each other, or thinking through, how that point system would work. I understand, we're looking at this in a rubric format, so I don't think they necessarily have to be in competition with each other, but I think that's something to make sure we look at in making sure there's not total incompatibility in priorities.
Thanks. Freitas.
Yeah, just following up on that. I mean, from the meetings, that my understanding was just, we have X percent of natural areas, we have X percent of fields. Yeah, the intent, what I was hearing from the people there was like, we don't want to lose some of the natural areas for more fields, or can we try and keep that balance, that historic balance that's always been in the park? So I think as it's proposed, is like, would we maintain that natural area? Or if it's agreed upon and people want to, we could increase it, but that would always be a part of the conversation. So that's the way what I was hearing. It's just, we love our natural areas, we love our baseball fields too. And let's not let one dominate the other. And so let's keep an eye on what, actually one person, Joe and Suzanne, if you remember, said, what's the percentage? I'd love to see the percentage breakdown of the park. How much is picnic tables and softball fields, and how much is wooded areas, and how much is the riparian zone? And if we could see it in percentages, then we have a goal, like to at least maintain those percentages as best as possible. So That's just, I'm just trying to share what
Yeah,
I
more
understood the
context.
takeaway.
Okay. Absent further comments. Next, does the project interpret and educate people about natural systems? I think this answers your comment earlier, Suzanne. And then proposed, does the project interpret and educate people about natural systems, including their spiritual, historic, and climate-centric value? Maurice, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was talking to myself, but what does climate-centric mean?
We heard a fair bit of discussion in the land group, and Joe, others, feel free to jump in here, about the climate centricity of how things are developed in the future, about preservation of tree canopy, for example, about making sure that we've got natural shade, about all kinds of things related to how changes in the climate may need to affect how we plan in the park. So that's kind of what that is.
Yeah. I love the way you just described that, particularly the canopy, the tree canopy, that sort of thing, but climate centric isn't, it's not a term I'm familiar with relative to what you described.
Okay. Parker?
What if we use a word like climate conscious rather than centric? Because centric can make it sound like you're like a zealot or something like that, you know, that, you know, so I think climate conscious kind of adds the same idea, but less confusing to me.
That sounds good, Maurice. Okay. Tony.
Don't we have a similar phrase a while back that did not include climate centric? And so do we need to go back and add that to that other space where we talk about
We
the
can
spiritual?
take a look at that. I know what you're talking about.
Just to keep it all sort of tightly together.
Other thoughts?
I guess this came out of in our groups that they wanted to enhance the term natural. So that was their problem, was with natural systems that include people, history, the connection to the river that various groups have. So you're trying to interpret, this is a question mark. Are you trying to interpret or expand on natural? Including there's, so
Yeah.
you're still restating in natural systems, including,
Right.
So they, I don't know, that's what's caused me pause.
Yeah, and I think that they were trying to get on the climate centric. I mean, I think they wanted to try to be able to tell, if you're interpreting and educating people, they want to be able to tell the story of the value of nature for, a benefit. So it wasn't so much, I mean, climate is such a, gets to be such a volatile word sometimes. And it wasn't about that. It was more about the idea that there's a benefit to nature and we should be able to tell the story, water quality and air quality and heat island and all the other things that the benefit, if you're, again, we're talking educating and this is the education and interpretive section. It was to tell the story of the value of nature and its benefits. That's where I think most people were kind of leaning toward. So if there's some way to capture that, it was more about just using the interpretation to tell that story that nature has a benefit.
Yeah. I see it in the comments. Sarah, just leave it at climate without a qualifier. So not climate conscious or climate centric, but climate, and then ecological value would be another addition to that series that would make sense.
And would it be something we would consider to take out natural systems and say, does the project interpret and educate people, including their spiritual, historic, ecological and climate or something without saying natural systems, because that's what made them stumble in our conversations, was that term.
Yeah, let me think on this one a little bit longer and come back with some changes to the proposed there. I think we've got a number of not necessarily inconsistent changes suggested that we can take a look at. All right. And for the land area, we've got a new criterion, and that is, does the project protect or enhance natural ecosystems in the park? So choices: yes, a good addition; no, not a good addition; or let's discuss.
What about adding the word restore to that sentence?
Makes sense to me. Okay, 20 yeses. Next, going on to circulation and connections. And thanks for hanging in with us. Okay, so new criterion again. Does the project include design features that improve and promote public safety? We've got a couple of folks from that group here, so please feel free to chime in. Any comments on this one? Tony.
This was my group, and this was a very big concern in all of the groups, the public safety aspects.
Great. Any other comments on this?
Well, people were concerned about lighting on trails, but where appropriate, because they know, like along the river can't have lighting, or in those wooded areas, but they wanted some type of public safety. And so that was something that was brought up too.
Sarah, your question as to whether lighting is addressed elsewhere, we don't specifically address lighting within the criteria. I think likely it would fall within a lot of the language that is meant to preserve and enhance natural areas. Certainly, you can't do that while also lighting it up like daylight, but no, there's no specific lighting criterion. Okay, keep moving here. Another new one. Does the project provide green corridors for wildlife and avoid interfering with habitat areas? Yes, a good addition. No, not good. Or let's discuss. All right, a no and a let's discuss. So please speak up.
I'm not clear where we are on the on some habitats over other habitats. For instance, and this may be a red herring, but the feral cat colony, bird colony. I mean, it's something that I think we've addressed elsewhere, but this is a little bit of a could be a polarizing part of a polarizing criteria. I'm not sure that we understand exactly what habitat areas we're referring to, what kind of wildlife. It is addressed in other questions that we've already been through. That'd
Yeah,
be
I
my,
think
go ahead.
that's a good point. I don't know that we specifically address that differentiation in habitat type anywhere.
Yeah, and when people were discussing this, they mostly brought up birds, like migratory patterns. That was what most people were talking about here.
Sarah had the comment, I don't like the word interfere, maybe negatively impact. I think that could clarify that a little bit.
So in our group, it came up and they said even signs that say we're closing this area temporarily during bird migration or whatever's going on, so that we're balancing the people use with the animal wildlife use.
Yeah, Randy's comment, we may be putting severe limitations on needed improvements. I think that's where the need for balance comes in. Corey, do you want to?
Jay, my recollection that we heard the most noise about this, Selena, correct me if I'm wrong, they were talking about, was it Avenue B? And not making that too any more public, I guess, but protecting Avenue B and that end of things, if that helps.
Yes, that's what I heard too.
So to my comment, and I am not the wildlife or bird expert here by any means, but I mean, there are some places where nesting creates other issues. And so like we have to balance. And it's not that nesting can't happen, but like there are places that are more preferred than others within the park. Is that an overstatement?
Yeah, I would defer on that, but to Sarah's, maybe what Sarah is getting at here in her comment in the chat, designated areas might be problematic language. I could see some pushback on that. Other comments here? Got a couple of changes, I think. Randy's comment, this is a heavily used park in a densely populated area, somewhat untouched land. And then Sarah, obviously we can't decide where the birds go, they do. It's very true.
Yeah, and something else part of the discussion was we were concerned, about people, how people move around the park, but not about animals. And so that's where this was going to. Some people brought up the land bridge, how, animals cross the street or the trails. And so that's just something that they were concerned about, how animals can cross paths too.
All right, let's keep going here. A new criterion, does the project connect areas of interest throughout the park without negatively impacting sacred, sensitive, and natural spaces? Already got a let's discuss, so please speak up.
Who defines
Anyone?
what? Yeah, who defines what area is sacred?
And Tony?
This was, Selena helped me with this one. This one was, I believe, it was about the connectivity more than about what it was. It was about how do we get through the park and honor all the different use. It goes back to the use of spaces. Was I right on that, Selena?
Yeah. So some people were concerned about keeping those sacred spaces where people are like meditating or, you know, something sacred there, and not impacting those with trails. They wanted them to be connected, but not where it's, I guess, just trails or connections went straight through those spaces. They still wanted them separated in a way. Right, Tony? That's what I was hearing.
And I
I guess
think,
I
Joe,
read
to your
that.
comment, and, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just, so what areas are sacred? Are they marked somehow, or can anyone define that from themselves by sitting down in an area and say, you can't go through this area, I find it sacred?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that's kind of, there's no other real way to determine that.
But we're putting it as a criteria to say that we won't do it.
Right. I think that weight is kind of shifting against this one here. Maurice's comment, we have addressed respect and balance, whereas this criteria prohibits impact in spaces that are hard to define. I think, Joe, is kind of, that's your point.
I agree that it's covered in other places, and so I'm happy to say let's move on.
Randy, the sign-in is menti.com, and that code is 47605429. I think I can do that. Okay, or you can just click that link. Okay. New criterion. Does the project avoid negatively impacting traffic within and adjacent to the park as shown through traffic studies? I'll let the circulation group talk to this one, but I imagine it has a lot to do with concerns about additional traffic. Go ahead, Tony.
I think the biggest question was, do we do traffic studies and when do we do them? And how, and can that be the criterion for whatever it is we do? Did I get that right, Selena?
Yes.
Okay, some good support here. Joe, go ahead.
The city doesn't conduct its own traffic studies. They ask when required for the developer to do that. So as shown through traffic studies implies that somebody's going to do that. And I just want to make the statement that it's going to have to be whoever's creating the project. And I don't know if we should put it here or just that people would know in the room that are using this that they would have to require it.
Yeah.
I think there was supposed to be a traffic study done. Isn't that correct, Corey? That there was, I remember Lori mentioning that there was going to be funding for a traffic study, a more current traffic study. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, that was part of the same action by the Midtown TERS that approved this project. And so that's the next step after we work on this.
So it seems if that's the case, it may be the traffic. I mean, I'm hoping that if the traffic study is done, that will be sort of the baseline, I guess. But this seems, I don't know if it's a little premature. How can we anticipate that there may be another traffic study done that's not necessarily done per project, but done as a baseline for the city? So I don't know how this question would factor into that. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, I think that's 17 yeses. Okay, we're going to keep going.
Oh,
And then,
hold on. Sorry, Jay.
Yep.
I had my hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, Parker.
Yeah, no
Go
worries.
ahead.
So I'm a little confused by this one because does this mean we don't want to adopt projects that could increase traffic to the park?
I mean, I think that's basically what it's saying. Yeah. Additional negative impacts to traffic within and adjacent to says that.
So if we have a park that I have heard described as dying and we're not getting enough people going to the park, why would we turn down projects that are going to increase traffic to the park?
I, I don't know that we uniformly heard that people were concerned about lack of traffic in the park. I think it's kind of the other way around, honestly. It's a very heavily used park. Taylor, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, I just think I don't know if I love the wording, but I think more the community concern is how does this fit into existing projects and plans for circulation? And to Tony's point earlier, like, is the traffic study done? How does that work? I think there's more general confusion or concern about how the car traffic flows and is planned rather than, you know, specifically avoiding traffic.
Yeah, because to me, the way this is worded is like we can't do anything if there's going to be more car traffic coming. And I personally I don't want that for the park. I think that like we don't want it to impact maybe the surrounding neighborhoods like River Road. And River Road needs to be accounted for with these projects because they can't get the in and out of their neighborhood if it's we don't do a traffic study and figure out the traffic patterns to improve that. I'm just not a fan of the wording of this.
Selena, Tony, do you think that's something we can address through rewording?
Yes.
You let us play with it. That was not the intent, Parker. The intent again was, are we doing traffic studies first and foremost? I think. Have we done? What does it look like? And then the other part was, how do we manage the traffic better? And so I think Selena and I can play with the words on that if everybody's okay with that.
Yeah, and I think Kathy in the chat said, I think a proposed project could include traffic mitigation features, which might help. And I think there's some agreement with Parker's comments in the chat as well. Joe?
Maybe it needs to say, does the project plan for traffic within and adjacent to the park as shown through traffic studies?
You get that? Okay. All right, absent further comment, I think we've made it to the end of that. Rachel, could you give us a quick update on what we're thinking?
Sure thing, and I'll keep it short here. I know we're close to time. So confirmed for January 30th for the next community meeting at 5:30. I don't know if anyone saw the Express News front page story from yesterday, but that got out with our survey. So I'm really excited to see the survey picking up speed. We are again promoting this meeting as we did the last one through media outreach, community calendars, SA Speak Up link, and our email remarketing. The difference to note for this meeting is that we are proposing that we do gather in the large hall for this collective activity and a presentation of the survey results. So we won't be utilizing the breakout rooms like we did last time, given that we are looking kind of for a larger consensus and gathering. We'll have the number of submissions for the surveys, our findings from the last community meeting, sort of what Jay went over, and then we'll engage in the Mentimeter activity, which I think will be incredible. We're also going to offer the audio video recording station similar to the last meeting, and we'll have that kind of in the back area or in one of those breakout rooms. I believe we got 5 video submissions last time, so that worked out well, and it did feel like if there's someone who wants to have sort of a voice heard, that we don't necessarily want in the middle of this activity to keep this moving, that we'll direct them to the audio video. We can also have our oversized Post-its for note taking, and if the public wants to make comments or write questions on there, they can. And then this last note that we had was that we want to offer that written question opportunity on note cards where attendees can write questions, and then we will gather them at the end of the Mentimeter activity and read those aloud. So we want to offer a kind of a written opportunity. We did have that from folks in the last one of like, I want to put down my question or I want to email someone. So we can pass those cards out when they check in and sign in and just say like, hold your questions, or if you have a text-based question that you want, something that you feel didn't get addressed last time, write it down on the card, and we'll leave a certain amount of the end of the agenda for Q&A, which Jay will lead. And then we'll have our stakeholder folks who did an incredible job last time. Thank you so much for leading those discussions. So we'll have folks there. We'll have our tech committees. We'll have our city folk available to jump in and answer questions at the end. That's the overall. And Tony, I see you have a question.
I have a question and a comment. First of all, I think that the meeting went very well, the last meeting. One thing I would have done differently, two things I would have done differently, is I would have had a handout of the principles. They were on the walls, but those rooms were so big it was really hard to read them. And we wound up, at least I wound up wasting a lot of time reading it to people. So if we could have a handout with these principles so that people can see them, I think that that would be really helpful. The second thing that didn't work in the small rooms anyway, in the couple of the rooms I was in, we had the note taker in the back of the room. And so people didn't see their comments, didn't see me in the front of the room writing it. So I wound up writing it. So I think we need to make a point of letting them know that we're taking notes and where we're taking the notes.
Okay.
And then my last thing is that I had a phone call yesterday from a neighborhood person who is was not happy with the fact that the survey is online, and that quoting me about what percentage of seniors do not have access to the internet, and that we need to somehow get the word out better, that has to be an alternative to online. I do know that there were paper copies. I don't know if we'll continue to take the surveys that day on the 30th or not, but that's just the phone call I got yesterday. So that's it.
Okay, that's good feedback. And then Joe?
Yeah, I thought everything went well the last time. The one exception to that, and I appreciated Lori and the councilwoman speaking, but they use projects over and over again instead of criteria for projects. And they did not follow the scripts that I saw that were given to them. So if someone could prompt them, whoever's speaking, to introduce this next meeting, we are really taking a lot of pains to make sure we're talking about overarching criteria and guidelines, and those words were not used by Lori or by the councilwoman. They were kind of doing it off the hip. And so whoever is speaking, it may not be the same people. I just think they need a little bit more understanding of what we're trying to accomplish and maybe encouraged to stay on script.
Okay. That makes sense. Thank you for that feedback. And I'm just sharing a note from chat. There should be a handout with all the questions that will be presented on Mentimeter, so they'll know if some of their comments or concerns may be addressed in other questions in advance. So I like that, having the printout basically of the questions. And so people, if they do go back and forth digitally, can feel like they have their copy and can reflect on there as needed. Okay, thank you both. And freights?
Yeah, just kind of keying off of Joe's comment. It seemed that there's a lot of confusion. I mean, we have 2017 bond money, we have 2023 bond money, we have TERS money, and that was all mentioned at the beginning. And this project, or this effort, isn't really to address something that project from 2017 or some of the monies that have already been spent. I just think that it needs to be crystal clear that we're not speaking to some of the other projects that have had a lot of opinions, let me just say, and that we're trying to create a guidelines to avoid the lack of communication or the misunderstanding. But I know I counted like 4 or 5 different funding sources when Lori and we're talking about city projects. The city's funding this, but then there's TERS money, and so I just think the more the better the understanding of what the goals are of this stakeholder group, and relay that to the public in clear language is important.
Okay. That's good feedback. Thank you, Freights. And I see in here, there's a note from Kathy regarding some substantial proportion of the people in my room did not understand the criteria concept. So I have a note here, Jay, we can talk about, is there a way to maybe visualize the guiding principle and criteria layers? Like that might be interesting to be able to do, to show like, if we're talking about them as layers or how they filter, or that can tie back to what Freights mentioned about the goals of this committee and what we're developing and how they look maybe visually in a, not a decision tree, but something of sorts.
And I think that gets to some of the, some of these criteria are redundant. I wrote this in the chat. I mean, they do say the same thing. And I think the question is going to be, is there, like you said, is there sort of a filter? Is there a reason that there's redundancy? Because if it's a river project, it's going to go through the river filter and not the land filter. I mean, so I don't know how this is going to work, but there does seem to be a lot of redundancy. And I think that we're going to need to address that either in how you're saying the criteria could be used. I know we don't necessarily want to do an example, because anytime you do an example, that just starts, down a rabbit trail. Right. But I do think, they're just going through it today. There is a lot of things that overlap with each other. And how's that going to work?
I think the project team needs to take a run through these and identify those redundancies. And we may, even before this next presentation, do what we can to excise some of that. But yeah, I think addressing how these will be used should help with that. Doing so is going to create more questions, undoubtedly. So that's got a flip side, but.
Okay, that makes sense. Any other thoughts or feedback on just public outreach? And as a note, I think we had 114 sign in outside of staff and committee, and 130 at the last meeting with staff and committee. Appreciate y'all. I think that's all I got, Jay, unless you had anything else.
Okay, thank you. I don't. I think we're well over time at this point. Corey, hand it back to you.
I mean, I don't have anything unless we just want to quickly, for those that are interested, you can hang up if you're not, but I can share my screen and show the latest survey results just so you get an idea.
I've actually got
Oh, go ahead.
I've got an edited version in here still. I apologize. I'm going to have to drop in about 5 minutes, but we've got a few things here that might be of interest. And I'll just kind of go through these quickly. Historic aspects of the park. Most important natural ecosystem is the first. Second is story of the park. Third is historic and prehistoric structures, and those dominate. All projects in Brackenridge Park should do a lot of feedback for preserving and enhancing nature, and then a pretty distant second was promoting inclusivity and diversity, and then promoting access a third. Is there anything that you think all projects in Brackenridge Park should not do? Should not destroy nature, should not commercialize the park is the second thing. A three-way tie for third, excluding indigenous voices, limiting public access to or in the park, and limiting pedestrian and cyclist access. What aspects of the park are you unhappy about right now? General policies and poor maintenance is first, trash is second, lack of safety third, and then another four that had some significant response: breakdown of the park's ecosystem, automobiles, campgrounds, and lack of bilingual signage, and other. What do you value most about the river? These results are a little bit tough to read, so I'm going to interpret a little bit. Plants and animals ranks first with a rank of 1.6. So that means that just about everybody had plants and animals as first or second about what they value most about the river. Historic character rank was 2.5, so that's most people had that as 2 or 3. And then flood control, 3.5. So most people had that as 3 or 4. Recreational opportunities is 3.7, so 3 or 4 as well. People rank spiritual connections as 4+, generally, of course, not exclusively. How important do you think it is to add more walking and biking paths to connect parts of the park? 55% very important, 24% somewhat important. So that's nearly 80% feel like that's a very critical thing. So Randy commented remarkably few responders. This is from January 11th. This particular question had 66 respondents. I don't know if you've got the current numbers, Corey, but I think we're above 100.
It's on app. So you don't have to answer every question, but we
Right.
have looks like generally 216 or more responses for all of these questions now.
Do you feel that increasing the amount of park space available for use without paying fees is important? 55% very and 18% somewhat. 16% was unsure. So again, a fairly overwhelming response, about 75%. Which of the following is most important to you? And you only got to choose one. And Corey, I think this one is actually, no, I guess 48% is natural areas like the heavily wooded areas in the park. 35% was the river and nearby areas. And then with small responses was recreational areas and open space. So of the 66 respondents, the overwhelming majority preferred natural areas and the river. Please select one answer below that best represents your opinion on parking in the park. 34%, I would like to remove some parking in the park and replace it by building parking garages at the edges of the park. That was the most popular answer. Second was parking situation is fine, don't want to change it. 18, there's enough, but not during large events. 17, there is not enough parking, but I would not sacrifice parkland. And 5% were okay with more parking on parkland. How do you feel about cars driving in the park? You got to choose 2 here. 55% would support limiting traffic in the park depending on the details. And 28% feel like it can be dangerous sometimes because of car traffic. 22% would not change anything. 16% was particularly important to have direct access to areas in the park with my car. Nobody thought we needed more roads out of this respondent subset. When you were walking or biking in the park, do you ever feel unsafe due to car traffic? 40% sometimes, 30%, 29% not that often, 19% never. 11% yes frequently. So that's more or less evenly divided. What do you believe is most important? Again, in the ranking. So first was restoring the health of the river and its ecosystem. That and maintaining native landscaping and trees received about equal rankings. So most people ranked those 1 and 2. Then ranking third, preserving archaeology and historic structures. And then the remaining items more or less split the rest of the vote. Preserving areas used for celebratory practices like Easter Sunday, preserving spiritual areas, and creating additional recreational areas. And that is what I've got.
Well, and you guys have done a really good job of kind of taking those text-based answers and putting them into different buckets. I know that takes a lot of manual work to kind of look at those and do, so appreciate that.
Thank you. So please forgive me. I need to drop to jump to another meeting, but thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jay.